My wife vanished after what was supposed to be an innocent girl's trip, and now she's attempting to manipulate her way back into my life, as if nothing ever happened. A classic tale of betrayal that I never saw coming, though countless others have uttered those same words before me. Throughout our 4-year marriage, I genuinely believed we were building something special, something lasting. We had meticulously crafted plans and mapped out our future together. Our dreams intertwined like delicate threads in a tapestry that seemed unbreakable at the time. Children were at the heart of our shared vision, or at least I believe they were. From the moment we exchanged our wedding vows, the topic of starting a family dominated our every conversation, filling our quiet evenings and lazy weekend mornings with endless possibilities. She would spend countless hours enthusiastically discussing potential names, her eyes sparkling with joy as she designed elaborate nursery themes and browsed through endless pages of baby accessories online. Her face would light up with an almost childlike wonder as she planned our future children's lives in vivid detail, down to the smallest particulars. It became our special connection, our shared dream that seemed to bind us closer together with each passing day, each conversation adding another layer to the future we thought we were building. We were eager to embark on this new chapter, and everything appeared to be falling perfectly into place, like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. However, fate had other plans, delivering a devastating blow that would shatter our carefully constructed world into a million pieces. After several months of unsuccessful attempts to conceive, we sought medical advice, hoping for answers but dreading what we might find. The diagnosis hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. My sperm count was critically low, severely limiting our chances of natural conception. The news felt like a cruel cosmic joke, instantly vaporizing our dreams and leaving me feeling utterly worthless, less than a man. The impact was catastrophic, rippling through every aspect of my life like a stone dropped in still water. I spiraled into a dark place, my self-worth crumbling like a house of cards in a storm. Eventually, therapy became my lifeline, the only thing keeping me from drowning completely in the ocean of self-doubt and despair. Initially, my wife appeared supportive, her words carefully chosen as she claimed that our relationship was enough, that children weren't essential for our happiness. But there was an unsettling undertone to her reassurances, a subtle shift in her demeanor that I couldn't quite grasp at first, like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. Like a shadow creeping across a sunny day, her demeanor began to change, transforming so gradually that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. The woman who once spent hours dreaming about our future children now avoided the topic entirely, as if those precious conversations had been nothing but figments of my imagination. More disturbing were the subtle barbs that began to pepper her speech, calculated criticisms about my appearance, my lifestyle, my contributions to our household, each one precisely aimed to strike where I was most vulnerable. "Maybe if you took better care of yourself," she would say, her voice dripping with barely concealed contempt, eyes cold as winter frost. "You've really let yourself go." When confronted about these changes, she would deflect with the skill of a master manipulator, her practiced responses making me question my own sanity. She painted me as overly sensitive, paranoid even, her gaslighting so subtle that I found myself apologizing for bringing it up. But deep in my heart, I knew the truth. The woman I married, the one who would curl up beside me on lazy Sunday afternoons, planning our future with stars in her eyes and hope in her heart, was slipping away like sand through my fingers. She had become a stranger wearing my wife's face, going through the motions of our marriage with mechanical precision while her heart had clearly checked out long ago, leaving behind nothing but an empty shell of what we once had. We fell into a suffocating routine of careful avoidance, tiptoeing around the elephant in the room like performers in a twisted circus act. Our once vibrant discussions about adoption or surrogacy were met with dismissive waves and hollow reassurances that felt like daggers wrapped in silk. "As long as we're together, I'm happy," she would say, the words ringing false like a counterfeit coin in a beggar's cup. We had become mere housemates, sharing space but little else, our once passionate connection reduced to polite exchanges about grocery lists and utility bills. Then came the announcement that would ultimately unravel the last threads of our marriage. She wanted to take a girls' trip to America. Travel with friends wasn't unusual for her. She'd done it before, and I'd always supported her adventures, proud to be the understanding husband who encouraged his wife's independence. We lived in Brighton, and she'd been talking about this American excursion with her friends for months, painting pictures of shopping sprees and tourist attractions with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen from her in ages. Years of built-up trust made me dismiss the warning bells chiming in the back of my mind. Like a fool, I helped her pack, carefully folding her clothes and checking her travel documents, even drove her to the airport on that fateful morning, completely blind to the fact that I was actively participating in my own betrayal. Her final words haunt me still. "Thank you for being so supportive." There was something in her voice, a note of finality that I missed at the time. Those words, seemingly innocent, would later reveal themselves as her parting gift. The last crumb of our marriage she would leave behind, a mockery of everything we'd built together. That night stretched before me like an endless void as I stayed awake, watching the clock tick away the hours until her scheduled landing, each minute feeling like an eternity. 9 hours felt like a lifetime as I busied myself around the house, straightening pictures that didn't need straightening, organizing drawers that were already organized, checking my phone obsessively every few minutes, waiting for that promised message confirming her safe arrival. When the time came and went without a word, an insidious unease began to creep through my veins like poison, each unanswered call sending another wave of dread coursing through my body. My calls went straight to voicemail, each unanswered ring amplifying the terror building in my chest until I could barely breathe. Morning arrived with a silence so deafening it seemed to mock my growing panic. The sun rose on a world that suddenly felt off kilter, as if everything had shifted slightly to the left while I slept, leaving me stumbling in a reality I no longer recognized. More calls, more messages, each one more desperate than the last, my fingers trembling as I typed and redialed. The panic, initially a whisper in the back of my mind, grew into a roar that drowned out all rational thought, leaving me dizzy with fear and uncertainty. In my desperation, I reached out to her sister, hoping for any crumb of information, any sign that my worst fears weren't coming true. The confusion in her voice only deepened the pit in my stomach, turning my blood to ice. Then came the moment that shattered my world completely, the call to her supposed travel companions that would reveal the true depth of her deception. They weren't in America. They were having coffee 2 streets away from our home, completely bewildered by my inquiry. The truth hit me with the force of a speeding train, leaving me gasping for air. There was no girl's trip, no friends waiting across the ocean. She had orchestrated an elaborate lie, and I had been the perfect, supportive husband who had helped her pack her bags for her escape, unknowingly playing my part in her carefully scripted disappearing act. The realization turned my legs to water, my entire body going numb as the full weight of her betrayal crashed over me like a tsunami. I collapsed into a chair, my phone slipping from nerveless fingers as my mind struggled to process the magnitude of her deception. Every detail of her departure now took on a sinister new meaning, each memory tainted with the poison of hindsight, her lingering goodbye, that final thank you. The way she had looked back one last time before disappearing through the airport doors, a scene I would replay in my mind countless times in the months to come. She hadn't been saying goodbye for a week. She had been saying goodbye forever, and I had been too blind to see it. That first night alone in our house that suddenly felt too big, too empty, too full of memories that now felt like lies, was an exercise in torture that would have made Dante proud. I lay in our bed, staring at her vacant pillow still bearing the indent of her head, my mind replaying every moment of our marriage like a broken record stuck on repeat. The coldness that had crept into her voice, the subtle criticisms, the way she had distanced herself, all the signs I had willfully ignored now screamed at me from the darkness, a chorus of missed warnings that threatened to drive me mad. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of disbelief and anger. I oscillated between rage and despair, between wanting to hate her and desperately missing the woman I thought I knew. Sleep became a distant memory, food lost all taste, and my work suffered as I struggled to maintain any semblance of normalcy. The simple question, "How's your wife?" became a dagger to my heart, each casual inquiry forcing me to either lie or admit to being the fool who didn't see his marriage crumbling before his eyes. Salvation came in the form of therapy, though I resisted it at first like a drowning man too proud to grab the life preserver thrown his way. Pride, perhaps, or the lingering stigma of seeking help kept me from making that call, as if admitting I needed help would somehow make her betrayal more real, more devastating. But after months of barely functioning, of staring at walls and replaying every moment of our marriage looking for clues I'd missed, of drinking too much and sleeping too little, I finally reached out. My therapist became my anchor in a storm-tossed sea of emotions, a steady voice of reason helping me navigate the treacherous waters of betrayal and loss when I could barely keep my head above water. In those weekly sessions, sitting in that comfortable chair that initially felt like an electric chair of emotional execution, I began to unravel the tangled web of our relationship. The therapist helped me see what I had been too close to notice, too invested to acknowledge, that no magic moment would have made her stay, that her departure wasn't a reflection of my worth, but rather a testament to her own internal struggles. It was a bitter pill to swallow, this realization that I had spent years trying to fill a void in someone who had already emotionally checked out, like trying to water a plant that had long since died at the roots. Slowly, painfully, like a flower pushing through concrete, I began to rebuild myself from the ground up. I rediscovered old passions that had withered during my marriage, books I'd meant to read but had set aside to focus on us, recipes I'd wanted to try but had abandoned because she was always too tired to try new things, places I'd longed to visit but had never suggested because they didn't fit into her carefully curated life plan. The gym became my sanctuary, Not because of her criticisms about my appearance, but because each drop of sweat felt like releasing a tiny bit of the pain she'd left behind, each rep a small victory in reclaiming control over my life. Work, which had initially suffered in the aftermath of her departure, became my unexpected ally in recovery. I threw myself into projects with renewed vigor, finding satisfaction in tangible achievements that couldn't be taken away, couldn't be twisted into lies. The extra hours and dedication paid off in ways I never expected. A promotion came my way, something that might never have happened if I'd still been caught in the cycle of trying to save a marriage that was already gone, like attempting to resurrect a corpse with CPR. The hardest part, the mountain that seemed impossible to climb at first, was learning to trust my own judgment again. Her betrayal had shaken my faith not just in her, but in my ability to read people, to know what was real and what was merely a carefully constructed facade. But as months passed, I began to recognize the strength in vulnerability, the wisdom in acknowledging pain rather than burying it beneath layers of false bravado. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd unconsciously distanced myself from during my marriage, realizing too late how she had slowly isolated me from my support system. Their support, untainted by the complexity of my marital drama, became a lifeline to normalcy, a reminder that not everyone in my life was capable of such calculated betrayal. Time, that great healer of all wounds, worked its subtle magic like a master artist restoring a damaged painting. The sharp edges of betrayal began to dull, the constant ache in my chest gradually fading to a manageable throb, like an old injury that only acts up in bad weather. I started to see my reflection in the mirror and recognize someone stronger, someone who had weathered a storm and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. The man staring back at me was no longer defined by her absence, but by his own presence, his own journey of recovery, his own triumph over adversity. Then, like a ghost materializing from my past, she appeared at my doorstep one Saturday morning, a specter I thought I'd finally exorcised from my life. The sight of her standing there, a baby cradled in her arms like a shield, sent ice cascading through my veins, freezing me in place. Time seemed to freeze, reality warping around the edges like a painting left out in the rain as I struggled to process the surreal scene before me. She looked almost the same, perhaps a bit more worn around the edges, but her eyes still held that familiar look of expectation, as if she genuinely believed I would welcome her back with open arms, as if the past year of pain and betrayal could be erased with a simple smile. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice carrying that same sweet tone she'd used countless times before, the one that used to make my heart skip but now made my stomach turn. The audacity of it all hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Here she was, standing on my doorstep as if she'd just returned from a casual errand, not a year-long disappearing act that had left me shattered and struggling to piece myself back together. "No," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me, a hurricane of emotions threatening to break free. "You can stay right there." I wouldn't allow her to contaminate the sanctuary I'd built from the ashes of her betrayal, wouldn't let her cross the threshold into the life I'd painstakingly reconstructed without her. She shifted uncomfortably, but launched into her prepared speech anyway, like an actress who'd rehearsed her lines but couldn't read her audience. "I know this might be a shock," she began, her words dripping with practiced sincerity that rang as hollow as a copper penny. "But I wanted to come back and explain everything. I've realized I lost the best thing that ever happened to me." Her eyes darted to the baby, then back to me, using the child like a prop in her performance. "This is our second chance." The phrase hit me like a slap across the face, the words echoing in my head like a cruel joke. Our second chance. As if this child she'd had with another man was some magical reset button that could erase the devastation she'd left in her wake. As if all the nights I'd spent staring at the ceiling, all the therapy sessions, all the pain and rebuilding could be wiped away with 3 simple words. The anger that bubbled up inside me was almost overwhelming, a volcano of rage threatening to erupt, but I maintained my composure, determined not to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. "Why did you leave?" The question that had haunted me for months finally escaped my lips, my voice barely containing the tremor of suppressed emotion, years of unanswered questions condensed into 3 simple words. Her response, when it came, was delivered with a casualness that bordered on cruel, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the deliberate destruction of our marriage. "I wanted a child," she said, looking down at her feet before meeting my eyes again with an almost defiant stare. "I found someone who could give me one, since you couldn't." The words hung in the air between us, sharp as knives, each syllable a fresh wound to my barely healed heart. She spoke as if discussing a simple business transaction, not the calculated demolition of our life together, the betrayal of every promise we'd ever made. She went on to explain, her voice taking on a tone of practiced victimhood, that the child's father hadn't stayed, that she'd had an epiphany and realized she wanted me back. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost laughable, like a poorly written script performed by an amateur actor. We can be a family, she pleaded, clutching the baby closer, using the innocent child as an emotional bargaining chip in her desperate performance. The three of us. When I didn't immediately respond with the enthusiasm she'd clearly expected, her demeanor changed like a switch being flipped, the mask of contrition slipping to reveal the true face beneath, the face I should have recognized years ago. She became angry, her sweet tone morphing into something bitter and accusatory, reminding me with venomous precision that she could have taken half of everything in a divorce. This house should still be mine, she spat, her true colors finally bleeding through the carefully maintained facade like ink through wet paper. I felt an almost serene clarity wash over me as I watched her transformation, like witnessing a magic trick where the illusion finally becomes clear. You made your choice, I said, my voice calm and final, carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. You wanted a different life, and now you have it. This isn't my responsibility anymore. The look of shock on her face as I closed the door was almost worth all the pain she'd caused, like watching a carefully constructed house of cards finally collapse. But she wasn't done with her performance. She began pounding on the door, her voice rising in pitch as she cycled through various tactics, guilt, anger, manipulation, each one more desperate than the last, like a drowning person grasping at straws. The neighbors must have gotten quite a show that morning, but I remained unmoved, my resolve hardened by months of therapy and self-discovery. When she finally ran out of steam, the silence that followed was deafening, heavy with the weight of finality. In the days that followed, the aftermath of her return rippled through our social circle like waves from a stone dropped in a still pond. Her family reached out, her father making thinly veiled suggestions about financial assistance, as if money could patch the holes she'd torn in my life. Friends I hadn't heard from in years suddenly appeared, armed with guilt trips and pleas for understanding, their well-meaning interventions feeling like salt in wounds that had finally started to heal. But I stood firm, my resolve strengthened by the realization that I had already done the hardest part. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up without her, brick by painful brick. Through the grapevine, I heard she was struggling, bouncing between her parents' house and friends' couches like a pinball in a machine, unable to maintain steady employment or stability. Some suggested she was still holding out hope that I would change my mind, that I would step in and play father to her child, as if my life were simply waiting on pause for her to return. But that door was firmly closed, locked, and the key thrown away. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had left seeking what she thought would make her happy, only to find herself alone and struggling, while I had emerged stronger, more complete, despite the devastation she'd left in her wake. In the end, her return served only to confirm what I had already learned through months of therapy and self-reflection. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, building a life so complete that there's no room for toxic people to squeeze back in. As the dust settled and life returned to normal, I found myself grateful for the strange twist of fate that had brought her back, if only briefly. Her return had given me something I hadn't realized I needed: closure, the final period at the end of a painful chapter. The woman who had haunted my thoughts was no longer an enigma, but a cautionary tale, a reminder that sometimes losing everything is the first step to finding yourself. Looking back now, I can see the poetry in how things unfolded, like a story that had to be lived to be understood. The very thing that once threatened to destroy me, my inability to father children, had inadvertently saved me from a lifetime with someone who valued her own desires above all else, who saw relationships as transactions rather than connections. In the end, her betrayal had forced me to confront my deepest fears, rebuild my self-worth from the foundation up, and discover a strength I never knew I possessed, like a phoenix rising from the ashes of what I thought was the end of my world. Sometimes the most painful endings lead us to the most beautiful beginnings, and while I wouldn't wish my experience on anyone, I'm grateful for the man it helped me become, not despite the pain, but because of it.